So I recently finished playing Marvel's Spider-Man on PS4, and it was amazing! Superior! It really brought it home. Whew, I am out of Spider-Man puns. For now. Anyway, seriously, I haven't experienced this much childish glee while playing a video game in a long time. Maybe ever. As you swing through the city and the game's amazing theme kicks in, it really feels like you've been transported off of your couch and are actually flying through the skies of New York. You feel joy and hope, and all of those criminals down below better beware, because I'm coming for them. But, gameplay and presentation aside, what Spider-Man really pulls off is a tour de force with its story. Now, it doesn't do anything particularly new with how it spins its narrative web. Okay, they're done for real this time. It never strays too far away from the tried and true formula of telling its story through cutscenes, taking control away from the player and making you watch as the story happens. And that means that its story could probably have been told just as well in a short-form series, like a Netflix one. But all that aside, the story it does tell is deeply satisfying and emotionally resonant. And for me at least, it beats out every Spider-Man movie that has come before it. So, before I go any further, consider yourselves warned. If you didn't want to know that Peter Parker and MJ become cannibals who are trying to craft the perfect Hoboken human tartare on a Hannibal Lecter-hosted cooking show called Cooking with the Doc, then this is your spoiler warning. So, back to it. The events that we experience alongside Peter throughout the game's story are some of the most powerful and harrowing that we've ever seen him go through, especially for those of us who've only seen the movies. They make us feel his desperation as he has to choose who to save or which villain to prioritize, often with dire consequences. And in the antagonists of the story, we're given a mirror through which Peter and we can look at ourselves and say, what makes them any different than us? Why are they villains and we are not? And just what is it that makes a hero a hero? But before we can get to the bottom of that all-important question, we need to do what the game does and take a good long look at our opposing forces. Let's start off with the game's first villain, Mr. Negative. Now, if you're like me, this is a Spider-Man villain you'd probably never heard of before. So when we're first introduced to the character of Martin Lee at the start of the game, I certainly didn't see him as a city-destroying terrorist. Instead, we meet a man who successfully opened 2 homeless shelters in New York, and we also get to experience firsthand the positive effect those have had on their local communities, especially as we get to walk through one of those shelters, talking to people as we go and finding out how the shelter has helped them individually. Not only that, but our Aunt May also works at that shelter. And as you help Martin Lee throw her a surprise birthday party, you really see that he does care about Aunt May, and he truly believes that together they can make the community a better place. But there's something about Martin Lee that we don't know. Early in his life, he was part of an experimental clinical trial over at big bad evil corporation, Oscorp. His parents had signed him up in the hope that the experimental treatment would be able to help him with whatever disease it was that he had. The bad news is that the treatment unlocks negative energy powers in a young Martin Lee, and as it does, he accidentally kills both of his parents. But the good news is, at least he's cured? Justifiably, Martin is pretty upset with the CEO of Oscorp, Norman Osborn. He's the one who authorized the experiments, and Martin wants to bring him in for justice. So far, that actually sounds like a pretty noble cause. But on top of being an ultra-rich CEO, Norman is now the mayor of New York City. And Lee knows that there's no way for him to find any evidence of the experiments, and even if he did, Norman as mayor could probably bribe or intimidate anyone into letting it go. The only way to incriminate Norman is to have him incriminate himself. And so the cause gets ignoble very fast. Martin, as Mr. Negative, begins to terrorize the city, destroying anything that Norman Osborn has built, trying to ruin his legacy. Once he's done that, his plan is to get Norman to release the experimental treatment out into the wild, and the treatment has developed. It's now become a highly contagious bioweapon that could potentially wipe out the entire planet. So Lee's objective starts out as pure. He wants justice for himself and for his family. But in his mind, that justice can come at any cost. He wants to punish Norman. He doesn't care about civilian casualties or collateral damage. Given a binary choice between getting justice for his past trauma or protecting the people of the city, he chooses his justice before anything else. The same can be said for the game's second major antagonist, Dr. Otto Octavius. Now, when we first meet him, he is just the Doc. He is not Ock. He's Peter's boss and mentor, and they work together at an advanced science lab building prosthetics that they hope will one day be able to fully replace limbs, as well as a whole bunch of other save-the-world science projects. But as much as we wanted to, it's not to last. And that is all because of pesky Norman Osborn again. Out of spite, halfway through the game, he cuts the funding for Octavius's lab. See, it's revealed that Big Bad Evil Corporation Oscorp was originally founded by both Norman Osborn and Otto Octavius. But in a Steve Jobs and Wozniak kind of dynamic, the one who was better at sales and had more charisma is the one who stuck around, and the other one was let go. What this means, though, is that not Ock knows all about Norman's clinical experiments, and he knows exactly where he can find the evidence of them. And with the recent cut in funding, not Ock has to rush through experiments that he was previously careful with. And because of the rush, much like in Spider-Man 2, his magical robot arms begin to seriously mess with his mind. Soon, he isn't our kindly mentor anymore. He's Doc Ock. He's become a man who, like Martin Lee, wants justice and vengeance. He wants the world to see Norman for the unethical monster that he really is, and so he springs Mr. Negative out of jail. They then immediately put Mr. Negative's plan back into motion and release the experimental treatment, now bioweapon, out into the streets of New York. In the same vein, Doc Ock's goal of justice isn't a bad one. But again, there comes a point where he has to choose justice or the lives of millions of innocent people in New York. And again, he believes that his goal and his desires are worth more than the lives of others. Which brings us to the big daddy bad guy we've been talking about this whole time, Norman Osborn. Now, Norman is not a great guy. He never was. He didn't open shelters to help the needy, and his science experiments were for profit, not to save the world. Well, all of his experiments, except for one. Late in the game, it's revealed that Norman's son, Harry, is sick with an incurable genetic disease. All of those unethical experiments, including the ones that created Mr. Negative and the bioweapon now unleashed on New York, were research into how to save Harry. Norman was trying to find a cure for his son. So, much like Doc Ock and Mr. Negative, Norman had a choice. He could give up on his son, or keep trying to save him, even if that developed a bioweapon that could potentially wipe out the planet. And just like Doc Ock and Mr. Negative, Norman makes the selfish choice. He values the life of someone he loves over everything else. So, how do those three all relate back to Spider-Man? Well, the writers and designers of the game clearly understood that by giving their main character a set of foils, they could really shine the spotlight on Peter Parker. But what is a foil? In literature, a foil is a character within the narrative who's used as a direct contrast with our main character. The foil isn't always an antagonist or a villain, though they can very often be used that way. But it's by having a character who's virtually the opposite of our protagonist that we really get to highlight both the good and bad qualities of that protagonist. Think of the Harry Potter series, where Voldemort places no value on life or love. But Harry Potter is a paragon of those virtues, sometimes naively so. He refuses to kill even in battle situations, and he will always sacrifice himself if it will save one of his friends. And that doesn't sound too special. A lot of heroes have those qualities. But because we see the polar opposite of them represented through Voldemort's actions, we appreciate them so much more in Harry. And Marvel's Spider-Man exclusively on PlayStation 4 understands this. By highlighting the traits that make his villains villains, we see exactly what it is that makes Peter a hero. You see, after all is revealed and we've reached the climax of the story, Peter has to make a decision very similar to the ones that all his villains made. The contagious bioweapon has been released and millions in the city are infected, including Peter's Aunt May. Now, Spider-Man has finally retrieved the anti-serum, but that anti-serum is needed to make the vaccine that will be distributed throughout the city. That is something that will take hours, and Aunt May only has minutes. At that point, Peter can save her. He has the cure. Doing so would damn millions of others in the city, but his loved one would be safe. And the scene is so well written and so well acted that we almost want Peter to make the wrong choice. We feel his immense pain as he stands over Aunt May's withering body, and we want him to cure her, to save her. Why should he have to suffer anymore? But Peter Parker is a hero. He makes the selfless choice. He chooses to save the city and has to watch Aunt May pass on. In that same binary situation, where Peter had to choose between everyone in New York or protecting someone he loved, Peter made the right choice. It is the utterly heartbreaking choice, but it is the right choice. And it feels all the more right after seeing so many other characters faced with a similar decision and taking the opposite path. None of them wanted anything inherently bad. Ock and Mr. Negative wanted justice and a better world, and Norman just wanted to save his boy. But it's the lengths they went to that were wrong. Their personal desires came before everything else, including the lives of others. That's what makes all three of those characters villains. But in one final dramatic moment, Peter shows us who Spider-Man really is. He chooses the harder path, the path less traveled, and that does make all the difference, because that is what makes a hero. Well, now that all that serious stuff is over, guys, seriously, this game is really good. I'd almost say it's worth buying a PlayStation 4. It really does capture that childish fantasy of wanting to be a superhero, and not in the dark and edgy Batman way. If there's one word I could use to describe how I felt while playing this game, it's joy. Even if you used to play games and haven't in a long time, this could definitely be one that brings you back. I couldn't put it down, and when I was at work I felt like I was a kid counting down the minutes till I could run home and pick up my controller to start playing again. It is truly a special experience. And so to every single person who helped make that game, thank you. It was great to feel like a kid again.